Listen carefully, because this is something you, deep down, already know, but you've decided to ignore it.
We've all had that thought at some point. The fleeting idea that we are different, that we are above others, that our rules are different because we are different. And in that arrogance disguised as logic, we convince ourselves that the world owes us something. But what happens when you take that belief to its ultimate consequences? What happens when you convince yourself that some people don't matter, and that you have the right to decide who they are? That is Raskolnikov's curse. A brilliant young man with a sharp mind and a miserable life. Someone who believes he has deciphered the code of humanity, that there are two types of people in this world. The ordinary ones, whose existence leaves no trace, and the extraordinary ones, those who dare to break the rules imposed by mediocrity. And Raskolnikov, of course, wants to be one of the extraordinary ones. But here's what's interesting. What distinguishes great men is not intelligence nor strength. It's the ability to bear the weight of their actions. And that, my friend, is what Raskolnikov never understood. Because one thing is to imagine yourself as superior. Another very different thing is to put it to the test with blood. When he kills the usurer, the greedy and insignificant old woman who, in his mind, deserved to die, he believes he is executing a rational act, a necessary cleaning, a masterstroke in his rise to greatness. But the human mind is a battlefield, and guilt is a silent enemy that does not fight with weapons but with whispers. At first, it's barely a murmur, a shadow at the edge of his consciousness. But soon, every glance on the street is an accusation. Every sound at night is the echo of the crime he tried to bury. Paranoia becomes his only companion. And the worst part of it all, he can't tell anyone the truth. Because that would mean admitting he is not extraordinary, that he is not Napoleon, that he is not above the others. This is where crime and punishment becomes more than a story about a murder. Because this book isn't about the crime, it's about the punishment. And no, I don't mean jail. The real punishment is the inner hell in which Raskolnikov locks himself. Not because society pursues him, but because his own mind won't leave him in peace. Because, although he tried to convince himself that his crime was justifiable, his humanity refuses to be silenced. And this is what Dostoevsky screams at us on every page. The worst judge is not the law, it's the conscience. Enter Nietzsche, the man who proclaimed the death of God, the philosopher who took the idea of the Superman to the extreme, the one capable of creating his own moral system without answering to anyone. And for a time, this thought was seen as a justification for intellectual superiority, for breaking the norms. But Dostoevsky gives us a brutal warning. Without moral limits, man crumbles. The mind, no matter how brilliant, cannot hold itself up without an emotional anchor, without a connection to humanity. Raskolnikov is the failed experiment of the Superman. He believed he could act beyond good and evil, but he discovered that, deep down, he wasn't as strong as he thought. Guilt is not logical. It doesn't follow mathematical rules. It's a parasite that feeds on the soul, and when it catches you, there's no escape. But here comes the hardest part. It's not guilt that destroys Raskolnikov. It's his pride. Because there is a moment, a key moment, when he could have saved himself much earlier. Sonia, the only person who sees him beyond his crime, offers him a way out. Not in the form of absolution, but in the form of redemption. It's not about paying for what he did, but about accepting that he is not superior to anyone, that he needs others, that he is human. But admitting that would mean collapsing his entire life theory. And Raskolnikov prefers to sink into his misery rather than accept his fragility, until he can't take it anymore, until the weight of his crime becomes unbearable, And the only way to free himself is by confessing. Not because they catch him, not because justice catches up with him, but because his own mind forces him to do it. And here's Dostoevsky's most brutal lesson. Greatness is not in superiority, but in humility. In accepting that we are not better than others, that true power doesn't come from being above, but from connecting with others. And that redemption is only possible when we stop running from what we are. Crime and Punishment is not just a novel about a murderer, it's a warning. It's the mirror that we should all, at some point, look into. Because we've all felt the temptation to believe we are superior. We've all wanted to justify our mistakes under the flag of logic. But the human mind doesn't work that way. And life, sooner or later, shows us this in the most ruthless way. So tell me, how many times have you convinced yourself that you were different? How many times have you looked down on others, thinking that you, somehow, were special? And most importantly, how much longer do you plan to hold on to that lie before the weight of reality crushes you? Greatness is not in coldness. Greatness is in love, in compassion, in the ability to see beyond ourselves. And if you don't learn that in time, then, my friend, you've already signed your own sentence. Here is where things get really disturbing. Because up until now, we've talked about Raskolnikov as if he were an isolated case. As if his arrogance, his downfall, and his suffering were his alone. But that would be deceiving ourselves. Because Crime and Punishment is not just about a murder. It's about the sickness of the human mind. A sickness that, if you look closely enough, has also touched you. How many times have you justified something because you had your reasons? How many times have you looked down on someone thinking they were not at your level? How many times have you felt frustrated because the world didn't recognize your worth? Now tell me, what really separates you from Raskolnikov? Is the act of killing the only thing that defines his fall? Or rather, was it the process that led him there? And if that's the case, how far are you from that same path? Because Raskolnikov's story is not about a criminal. It's about all of us. It's about the inflated ego we all carry inside. About that little voice that whispers to us that we are different, special, above the rest. And it's about the brutal strike of reality that makes us realize that we are none of that. Dostoevsky, in his infinite brutality, holds up a mirror to our faces. He shows us Raskolnikov crumbling, watching his mind devour him. And on every page, he throws us an uncomfortable question. Do you really believe you are better than him? Because that's the scariest part of this book. It doesn't let us escape. It doesn't let us look at Raskolnikov as a monster. It forces us to see him as what he is. A man who could be any of us. And if he fell, what makes you think you couldn't fall too? But here's where the most painful twist comes. Because deep down, Raskolnikov was right about one thing. Not that he was superior. Not that he had the right to decide on life and death. Not that the end justified the means. But that there is a real gap between those who dare to act and those who live in eternal inaction. Between those who challenge the norms and those who settle for following them without question. And that's the dilemma that destroys Raskolnikov. He wasn't a true transgressor. He wasn't Napoleon. He wasn't a Superman. Because even though he tried to be, guilt crushed him. And that's where Crime and Punishment becomes a masterpiece of psychology. Because if you think about it, what does it really mean to be truly free from morality? What does it mean to not feel guilt? Psychopaths don't feel guilt. The monsters of history, the tyrants, the butchers, they can take a life without blinking, without remorse. Raskolnikov wasn't a monster, and that's what destroyed him, because his crime didn't just take someone else's life, it took his own. And that's what Dostoevsky is warning us about, that the human being is not made to carry certain weights, that there are limits that, if crossed, there is no going back, that we are not machines, nor supermen, nor creatures of pure logic. We are flesh and blood. We are emotions. We are contradictions. And the moment we try to convince ourselves otherwise is the moment we start to crumble. So tell me, where do you stand in this story? Are you the one who believes they have everything under control? The one who tells themselves they would never make such a big mistake? The one who thinks they are above judgment, fear, guilt? If so, be careful. Because crime and punishment is more than just a story. It's a warning. And if you don't understand it, you might one day, without realizing it, find yourself trapped in your own punishment. But there's something else. Something many overlook when reading Crime and Punishment. Something that has nothing to do with guilt, nor morality, nor justice. The void. Because beyond the crime, beyond his supposed superiority, what truly consumes Raskolnikov is the absence of meaning. Not guilt, but the existential abyss that opens before him when he realizes that everything he had built in his mind was a lie. Imagine this. You live convinced of an idea. You feed it, you defend it, you base your life on it. And one day, when you decide to put it into practice, you realize it doesn't work. That reality does not bend to your beliefs. That the grand theory that justified your existence crumbles the moment you test it. What do you have left then? Nothing. And the human being cannot live with nothing. That's why Raskolnikov destroys himself. Not just because he feels guilty, but because the crime shows him that his vision of the world was a delusion. Because in the end, he wasn't an extraordinary man, but just a desperate boy who tried to fill his void with a dangerous idea. And this is where Crime and Punishment becomes something much greater than a story about good and evil. Because Dostoevsky is not only talking to us about guilt, but about what it means to live without a real purpose. There is no worse punishment than discovering that your life has no meaning. Because guilt, no matter how unbearable it is, at least has a purpose. It guides you, it tells you what you did wrong, it pushes you to seek redemption. But the void tells you nothing. It only spreads, it expands inside you, it devours you slowly. And that's Raskolnikov's true hell, not the crime, not the guilt, but the moment when he realizes that everything he risked his life for was nothing but a fantasy. Here is where Dostoevsky's work intersects with the ideas of another giant, Viktor Frankl. Frankl, a psychiatrist who survived the Nazi concentration camps, wrote that the greatest human suffering is not physical pain or guilt, but the lack of meaning. That man can endure anything, any tragedy, any weight, as long as he finds a purpose. Raskolnikov has none. He kills because he believes it will make him powerful. But when he realizes he is still the same broken and tormented man, he sinks into an even deeper despair. Because now he hasn't just destroyed his life, he has destroyed the only idea that gave him a reason to keep going. And tell me, how many people today live the same way? Maybe they don't kill anyone, but they cling to ideas that give them purpose, ideologies, theories, justifications for their existence. And when those ideas fail, what's left? Some look for a new one. Others get lost in nihilism, in apathy, in depression. Raskolnikov tries to resist. He tries to hold on to his pride. But it's in vain. Because when reality crushes you, you can't deceive yourself forever. And here comes Sonia's role. Because Sonia not only represents redemption, she represents something more important, a new purpose. She's the only one who doesn't judge him, the only one who sees him as he is and, instead of condemning him, offers him a way out. Not with sermons, not with moralizing, but with a brutal truth. You have to accept what you did and find a reason to live beyond it. And this is what changes Raskolnikov. Not the fear of being caught, not the weight of the law, but the fact that, for the first time, someone gives him a reason to move forward. Not a reason based on arrogance, not on cold logic, but on something much more human. love. And this is where Dostoevsky delivers his strongest message. Because Crime and Punishment is not just a story about guilt and redemption. It's a story about what really saves a person from the abyss. It's not intelligence, it's not superiority, it's not the will to power, it's connection, it's love. It's the fact that, in the end, we cannot live alone, because when we try, when we convince ourselves that we are self-sufficient, sooner or later we end up like Raskolnikov, sunk in the void, with nothing to hold on to. So tell me, how many times have you felt that void? How many times have you tried to fill it with ideas, with justifications, with thoughts of superiority? And how many times have you ended up more lost than before? Dostoevsky knew it clearly. The mind without humanity is a weapon against itself. Arrogance does not lead to power, but to self-destruction. And the only way to save oneself is to surrender. Not to guilt, but to the truth that no one saves themselves alone. So ask yourself this: what are you hiding from? What lie are you using to avoid facing the void? Because if you follow Raskolnikov's path, the punishment has already begun.